better way. The big things for us on the embedded stuff, really the key thing to make GNU Radio better on embedded hardware is to improve the user experience. And the holy grail for us is to run something that looks like GRC on your desktop, where you can develop and test your flow graph on the desktop and then deploy to the embedded system. And then debug using things like control port and other things so that you have complete access to the features of GNU Radio on an easy to use interface. And that's basically going to mean remote debugging of embedded targets. And that's sort of the big thing for us. And I think a lot of that really falls into the user experience group as well. Another thing we've got a lot of interest in is lighter weight user interfaces so that we don't have to run full X servers. And we're going to take a look at Qt Embedded, and if anyone knows anything about Qt Embedded, we'd like to be able to run the Qt interface with the Qt Embedded system, which should give us better performance on graphic hardware. I'm just hitting the high spots here. Some low-hanging fruit. I know during Martin's talk he was showing some of the OFDM blocks, and he said, oh, by the way, this was done in Python because it was easier. And we probably need to find a way to identify blocks where the code is running, the work function is implemented in Python, and be able to clean those up. And that would be sort of good low-hanging fruit, I think, for all architectures, would be to find the blocks that are prototypes in Python and update them to have C++ implementations. And another suggestion for GRC is it have a way of showing you which blocks the signal processing code is in Python and which ones are in C++ to make those easier to find. And let me see my notes. And I think the final note that the important thing we came up with is we need better testing and development of C++ only flow graphs, just so we have minimum resources required on the target hardware. With that, are there any questions?
I have one. Kid, what's your very next step to make sure the process continues? You guys talked about a lot of stuff. How are you going to keep the momentum? This is really good.
Okay, so Corgan's question is, how are we going to keep the momentum of these work groups moving? And he was asking me specifically to just a general question for everyone. Obviously, this doesn't work. No one is actually, I mean, we all care about this stuff, but we need to make sure that we get resources allocated to make it happen. So my suggestion is, if you're interested in this stuff, communicate with us via the listserv. And if you need help finding something to fiddle with, I can certainly help you look for interesting things to work on. Do you have anything else to say on that? All right. But I think that is a really important point is, this is a continuous process, not just a point in time.
Sorry to put you on the spot there. Good answer. Next up is Martin Braun. We had the usability group, or whatever the original name was, break into two. So after Martin is going to be Sebastian talking about the GRC stuff.
Okay, so the user experience working group already had this very broad topic, and then it became even broader. I just didn't realize how many things there were that people wanted to talk about. And what we did was we went through the steps of the lifetime of a GNU Radio developer, starting at the very beginning, the first time you hit GNURadio.org, like through installation, and then how do you start developing. And the idea was to sort of branch out into what happens when you start developing your own tree modules, but we never actually got there because we had so much to talk about. So we got lots and lots and lots of really, really good feedback on the website, for example. And so we could always identify little small projects that usually we found a volunteer to take care of. And I'd like to give shout outs to all of these people who volunteered to do these little modifications. So yeah, as I said, we talked about the website. We had a huge tangent on the installation process. was something that it was clear that it's not really obvious how to install GNU Radio, and the fact that we have about 25 different recipes to install GNU Radio available on the website makes it actually harder and not easier on people. So we're going to take, like, where's Isaac? Like, he's actually currently working on the install GNU Radio page to sort of split it up into a sort of beginner level and more advanced level. We then sort of identified like one main source of problems for new developers is that there is no coherent set of tutorials where you can sort of start at tutorial 1 and then work yourself through. And from there we split up the working group into 2 groups. So there was a lot of interest in the GNU Radio Companion specifically, so we split that off, and Sebastian is going to talk about that in a minute. And then the other half, or was the other third, discussed tutorials, and or rather the tutorial section. And so we sort of identified how what we have to put on the website in order to get beginners involved into the GNU Radio process. And so, so John Malsbury has apparently volunteered to work on the front page of GNURadio.org, so which I'm very happy about. All the pages are. You're amazing, John. There are some issues with the start page that we can also take care of immediately. And before I pass over to Sebastian, well, one thing I wanted to add. I forgot what it was. Are there any questions? Sorry? Oh yeah, right. So Tracy and Shashank are sort of going to prepare a step of introductory tutorials. The idea is that we can assume that people are able to install GNU Radio, and then have a machine with a locally installed GNU Radio, and then they don't know what to do. So Shashank and Tracy will be working on sort of little samples of GNU Radio flow graphs. And one idea we have to make these examples more easily accessible is to add a drop-down menu in the GNU Radio Companion, which sort of accesses all the examples that are in the GNU Radio components. So we can sort of have a central way to access these, and sort of don't want the novices going through the effort of having to find them. And one problem that was identified is that some of the examples don't actually work. And this is something I'd like to mention to every one of them. So Tracy mentioned that like a beginner might open an example and it doesn't work, and that because you're a beginner, and you might not actually realize that there's a bug in this flow graph, or you just don't feel the need to communicate that to us. Now, the thing is that us core developers, we don't use these examples very often. We sort of put them out once, and then they might stop working because we've changed the APIs or whatever. And so I think the examples are a very, very important part of the radio, but it's one that's not under quality assurance at the moment. And perhaps that's something we should take care of, but we really appreciate it if when you identify broken examples or even obviously missing examples, that you mention that on the mailing list or wherever. Okay. That's pretty much it from this side. Are there any questions before we hand over to Sebastian? Yep.
Sorry, actually,
No, there's no question. He's going to do the next one. So.
he's talking about career advantage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that covers your thing. Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, so after lunch we started talking about GRC and GRC only in like a separate work group. What you see here is a wiki page that we kind of read up as we discussed stuff. These points originate partly from the IRC and later from the mailing list. I just copied that in here and just added some points on the very top that came into the discussion. There is several minor things that are on here. It's kind of a wish list of different people, which can be implemented with a limited amount of effort and in a short time span. Here's like export in the main menu, so you have an easier way to generate pictures and like documentation integration. But there's also bigger things like to create multi-page flow graphs, so you can sort of organize your stuff, but also to maybe group blocks just visually. I'm looking at Balin right now. And there's also like the handling of hierarchical blocks. Maybe you want them in just a graphical way for you to abstract certain parts of your flow graph. That's all stuff we can do and we should do in some sense. The next step here is maybe even we could start tomorrow to find people who are willing to start working on like minor of those issues that could be done in a day, or just want to get started on longer parts and just, yeah, start working. One thing that I've been working on just as a fun project was to start porting the whole GUI of GSC to the Qt framework, which has several advantages, but if we continue to move forward with this and start adding a lot of new features to like the old GUI, the GTK GUI, then we have sort of a double effort in some areas. So this is still an open task. We just ended discussion at this point to come up here. Yeah. Are there any questions for this? I already added the visualized block implementation language feature. So if anyone's willing to do that, it shouldn't be that hard tomorrow. Okay.
Well, that's not that important anyway. The bulk working group kind of talked about improving bulk. And if you're not familiar with it, it stands for the Vector Optimized Library of Kernels. It's important because basically GNU Radio kind of runs on general purpose processors, and bulk is how we take advantage of everything that's on the hardware. So one of the things that we kind of talked about was basically bulk is not intended for just handing stuff off to generic code processors. It's specifically designed for running SIMD instructions on your general purpose processors running GNU Radio. Some of the things that we can take advantage of basically in the future, and specifically I'm going to be working on bulk tomorrow and implementing kernels for Neon. So if anyone wants to work on that tomorrow, come see me and I can help set up an environment. One of the things that we need to do in the long term is identify blocks and functions that can basically be pushed off into bulk. So if you know of a block that has a functionality that can be vectorized with some deep instructions, then you should push that off to the mailing list because hopefully someone will be able to implement it. Along those lines, we talked about trying to aggregate results from bulk profile, and bulk profile is a tool that everyone should run after you install GNU Radio. It will run through all the bulk, or run through all the proto-kernels that bulk has, and set up big files that your runtime is a little bit faster for certain blocks that use bulk. Another thing related to identifying bulk kernels was implementations in GNU Radio. So right now, the bulk kernels that we have are kind of the type conversions use them a lot, and then outside of that, there's the GNU Radio core blocks. A lot of them don't take advantage of So anything that we can do for that, let us know. We also talked about the Volt dispatcher, which is just basically it's a one-stop interface from the general work function to useful. Pretty much every Volt kernel will have the same interface, or same API. So the dispatcher is kind of like a one-stop place you go to useful. So again, that's not for pushing stuff off to co-processors, but we think that the co-processor group might be able to look into that code and see if there's any reuse there. And then with the data aggregation, the project that we kind of came up with was basically if there's any way after the pipelines install, basically automatically run the Volt profile as kind of a post-install task, and then aggregate that data onto GNURadio.org so that, first of all, developers know what hardware is, or what kernels could use some tweaking, and then what kernels are failing on different hardware. That's kind of one of the things that we'd like to do. So that would be a great project, even if someone doesn't necessarily know the details of Volt. We can do it for a project tomorrow.